real conversations, and some hard truths. Gangs, drugs, and guns. Giving a voice to those willing to sacrifice. We have stories that need to be told. We have lessons that need to be taught. Protect and serve. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hey everyone, welcome back. Nathan Romas with you, and again with Phil Gurski for part 2 of the history of terrorism in Canada. And continuing to go through his book, but also some current events and talking about all things terrorism. So welcome, Phil.
Thanks, Nathan. Great to be back.
We left off talking about several of the major groups and some of the political foreign influence going on. I think we ended with Iranian groups. Talked a bit about the Air India bombing, and we're moving on to kind of your specialty from when you were working in the intelligence sector, Islamist terrorism. So in the book, and people need to get the book because we're hitting like the highlights of this. So as we kind of skip along, there's a lot of content that fills in some of these parts as well, and some people or groups that we don't necessarily talk about or touch on. But with the Islamist terrorism, you've got it broken down into 3 different parts: pre 9/11, post 9/11 to 2013, and then 2013 onward. You have it almost right up till today. It comes into 2023. So can you talk a bit about your expertise in this world?
Sure.
And then why it's broken down as such?
Sure. In many ways, I kind of fell into terrorism almost serendipitously. So when I joined the service, joined CSIS in 2001 from CSE, I was on secondment from CSE. And the reason they brought me over is that, you talk about Iran. I was an Iranian specialist. I was fluent in Farsi. I knew the Iranian Revolution inside and out. And we were worried about Iranian activities in Canada from a variety of perspectives, not just mucking about in the community, but, foreign policy and all that kind of stuff. But I'd also been an Arabic linguist before as a Farsi linguist. So when I did that, I kind of taught myself Middle Eastern history and Middle Eastern doctrine. I taught myself all about Islam because I had to understand sort of the to-ins and fro-ins of that area of the world. But terrorism was not something that I specialized in. CSE, I did not do counterterrorism when I was there. We had no counterterrorism file. That only began after 9/11. And then basically they had to create it, kind of thing. But clearly the service was heavily into counterterrorism. We talked, last episode about, the Sikhs. We talked about the Armenians. We talked about the Iranians. We talked about, other things, the FLQ dating back to the 60s and 70s. And the reason why I divided the Islamist chapter into 3 sections is that things really did change significantly on 9/11. So yes, counterterrorism is part of the Section 2C of the CSIS Act. So it's part of the service's mandate dating back to 1984. But it was essentially the poor country cousin of counterintelligence and counterespionage. Again, being an old Cold War organization out of the old RCMP security service, where these types of threats were deemed to be the most important, CT was kind of like a second fiddle to that kind of thing. But there clearly were terrorist threats and Islamist terrorist threats prior to 9/11. 9/11, of course, as I said, was an incredibly important event, not just obviously in American history, but world history, and it had implications for us here in Canada. And I think what happened is that in the post 9/11 period, we saw a shift in the sense of the types of groups and individuals who were planning acts of terrorism, either in Canada or abroad, in the greater name of Al Qaeda or along the Al Qaeda ideology. And so when I was with the service from 01 to 2013, we were almost full bore on counterterrorism. Like we had somewhere between 300 and 400 investigations on individuals and groups, and major cases, many of which we're going to talk about today, that thanks to good intelligence and good law enforcement, security intelligence cooperation, we stopped significant acts of terrorism from happening, not on the scale of 9/11. We're not talking about thousands of deaths, although the Toronto 18, I think, could have killed over 1,000 had they been successful. But it really was kind of the dominant theme. The reason why I put the third category, sort of post 2013, is for 2 reasons. One is that in late 2013, I left the service for Public Safety Canada. Again, another secondment to look into doing sort of countering violent extremism at Public Safety Canada. And by 2014, of course, we have two successful attacks 2 days apart, one in Ottawa, one in Montreal. And those are the first successful attacks by Islamist terrorists in a long, long time. And I'm going to brag that, I leave the organization, all of a sudden these guys are successful. So clearly I was the reason why they had failed in the past. But, 2013 started a trend where we had 4 or 5 or 6 successful attacks in Canada over a period of time. Again, not major attacks, although people did die, people were injured. So I think the division that I elected to use fit with my kind of time at the service, but it also fit in with, I think, are different trends in Islamist terrorism as it's developed over the decades.
Do you think, and we mentioned this on the first part, was I guess Canadians didn't really see these groups as attacking them. It was more attacking diaspora, or it was trying to fit a political cause, affect a political cause in another part of the world. But after 9/11, now it's like, okay, they're targeting us, right? Is that kind of the shift? That sounds like what we're talking about.
I think so. And I recall being in a meeting with some fairly senior people downtown in Ottawa where, and I'm not making this up, some person said, well, who cares if you go to India or Pakistan or Afghanistan and kill people? That's not our problem.
Mm.
I'm thinking, wait now, you're saying it's okay for us here in Canada to know that, Joe Schmo, who we know to be an Islamist extremist because we've investigated him, but he's not going to plot anything here. So it's okay if he goes and kills people in Somalia? Like, you're okay with that? It was a bizarre kind of attitude to have, and
That almost would kind of touch on something that I was thinking as a later point, where you talk about us kind of being like a net importer of intelligence. Like, we take more than we give to other people. So with that kind of attitude, it's like, if people found that out, other countries found that out, the amount of stuff they could stop telling us. Well, Canada all of a sudden is in a really bad place.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And let's face it. I mean, you're in law enforcement. If you were aware of a gang, a group, whatever kind of thing, who were planning a major crime across the border in Montana or Idaho or something, you say, "Well, it's only Montana or Idaho. Like, who cares?"
Yeah.
Like, how could you have that kind of attitude? You have a responsibility saying, "Okay, we have this information to indicative of a crime being planned, whether it's a terrorism or another crime." You have to do your due diligence, and it's irrespective whether the victims are Canadians, Americans, or Martians, for that matter. And so I just found it really strange that people just didn't seem to care. And in all honesty, terrorism only really hit home in Canada, and I'm really very confident in saying this after Nathan Thriller was killed on the Memorial Memorial in October of 2014, because all the cases we worked on in the 2000s and 2010s, the Toronto team, we're going to talk about via pastor, all that kind of stuff, nothing happened. And in fact, there were those who were critical of us in the RCMP saying we're making shit up, that we need more money, we need more attention, we need to prove to Canadians that we're effective.
Wow.
And so we embellished these plots. That these guys really weren't serious. They accused us of planting human sources in these cells that would, sort of gin these guys up to do something. And if it hadn't been for the CSIS/RCMP source, nothing ever would have happened. We kind of, we kind of I don't know, lit a fire under people. And this became huge in the candidate plot in Victoria in 2013, where at the end of the day, a jury found these two people guilty of terrorism. The judge said no, it was Mr. Big, plot. It was something that law enforcement invented, which is complete horseshit.
Yeah.
I testified in that trial, but so I mean, again, I think for Canadians, we always thought, oh, that happens over there.
Hmm.
It doesn't happen here, and as a consequence, we don't have to pay as much attention to it.
Yeah. Well, so when we're leading up to like 9/11, you have a few things that you cover in here, and some of it, surprisingly, comes back to like Leduc, Alberta. I never knew this was part of it, but
The Duke, yeah,
yeah. Uh, so one of the groups, though, you talk about is this Pakistani group, Jamaat ul Fukra.
Ukra, yeah.
And they had planned to bomb two locations, Toronto and Richmond Hill, during one of the Hindu Festival of Lights. So you kind of start with that group and just talk a little bit about them because this was an interesting part of the book. I think this is the first one where it's like we're talking about, okay, we're going to start doing some big things during
Yeah.
a festival in Canada.
Yeah. And for me, the Fuqua plot was most interesting because um, the people who planned it had a compound, and it is literally 15 kilometers from my cottage, which is in the Madawaska Highlands. So it's just kind of about an hour east of Algonquin Park, for those who are familiar with Ontario. And they had a compound where basically they trained and they planned this thing. And this was I mean, this goes back, so the JUF was a Pakistani group. Pakistan and India have never gotten along since partition in 1948. They still don't get along right now. If you ever read the news, Pakistan hates India, India hates Pakistan. They both have nukes. They're both pissed off with each other. And this group thought that, okay, we don't like India. They're treating Muslims poorly. That there's also this disputed area called Jammu and Kashmir, which at partition was kind of split between Pakistan and India, but India took it over. And so this is one more example of people saying, "Hey, Muslims are suffering. They're suffering at the hands of Hindus. Of course, Hindus being the majority in India. About 80 to 85% of Indians are Hindus. And so we're going to blow shit up here in Canada because we want to get some kind of retribution for the suffering of Muslims back home." And this was a real plot, and thankfully it was uncovered. And it was also, so not only was it bizarre from the perspective that you've got a Pakistani group hitting, Canadian Indians, Indian Hindus in Toronto and Richmond Hill, but also the leaders were all from the Caribbean.
Yeah.
They're from Trinidad and Tobago and Dominica. And I remember visiting with, I was down in Trinidad and Tobago many years ago, meeting with their security service. We had a long chat about these guys, and they were well aware they had a compound in Port of Spain in Trinidad, and the security services would watch them. But this is basically an Islamist terrorist group in Trinidad. And fast forward to the 2010s, Trinidad and Tobago had one of the highest per capita numbers of Islamic State fighters.
Oh,
So
really?
when we talk about the whole foreign fighter phenomena, 300 Trinidadians, and that includes families, went to go fight for ISIS. And you think Trinidad, like what the hell? This is a small island off the coast of Venezuela. So I think what the plot did for me, Nathan, is that it really kind of it sewed together a whole bunch of elements that were just weird. Okay, Madawaska Highlands, beautiful part of Ontario, cottage country. We got a jihadi group there. We got a Hindu temple in Richmond Hill being targeted. We got people from the Southern Caribbean who've immigrated to Canada, and so we got that Caribbean angle. And there's one more, by the way. So the leader was a guy called Tyrone Cole, and he ended up being sentenced to, I think, 15 years in jail, or was life, I forget, doesn't matter. And he spent most of his time in Kingston, in maximum security. I went to Kingston and talked to the staff there on many occasions, and they said, "Oh yeah, we think that under his tutelage, more than 50 inmates converted to Islam." Now, I'm not saying conversion to Islam is an issue. Lots of people convert, and I'm sure you're aware of this. You get to jail and you find Jesus or Buddha or something because it makes your life better.
Hmm.
But if your conversion to a faith is being led by somebody who wants to blow shit up in the name of Allah, what kind of Islam do you think he's passing on to these people? And there was at least one person who went on to become, I think, a just to the service, who was in fact converted by Tyrone Cole while he was in Millhaven. So again, you can't make this stuff up. There's so many different interesting angles to it, and it was a fascinating case. And thanks to good RCMP work, nothing ever happened. Nobody died, but it could have been serious. They had bombs, they had the technology, the training, and they could have done some really severe damage and killed or injured a lot of people had they been successful back in the early 1990s.
I think this is one of the themes that becomes kind of prevalent throughout the majority or the remainder of the book is talking about people who convert. And as it goes along, especially after 9/11, we see a lot more people just like you would think James Smith, and all of a sudden he's converting to Islam.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, how are these people, uh, you know, being led down a certain path where they go to the extreme route of things? So, yeah, I have to find a book on that about the mindset and the psychology of it all, because I think that would be
Yeah, and like I
fascinating.
said, nobody is calling conversion problematic.
Mhm.
People convert for all kinds of reasons, but if the vehicle
The
through
extreme part. Yeah.
yeah, if the vehicle through which you're converting, because I mean, you don't know squat about the faith. Like if I were to convert to Hinduism tomorrow, I know nothing about
Yeah.
Hinduism. And if the person who's leading me by the hand and saying, "Hey, Phil, read this," happens to be a Hindu extremist who thinks that all Muslims should be killed, well, of course he's going to pass on to me a particular version of the faith. And this also points to another issue that people get very, very sensitive about. In post 9/11, a lot of people said, "Well, this had nothing to do with Islam. Al Qaeda has nothing to do with Islam," and they still repeat that line to this day. And I say, wrong. Thanks for playing. It has everything to do with Islam, but albeit a non-normative, non-moderate interpretation of the faith. I said, if you say it has nothing to do with Islam, then can you please inform me why they're citing the Quran and why they're citing the Hadith, which is the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad? I'm not agreeing with their interpretation, but they're using the same Quran that normal Muslims do. They just happen to be interpreting it to justify their cause. So it has everything to do with the faith. But we've gotten to this point where um, people are they're nervous because some people stupidly are going to equate Islam with terrorism,
Yeah.
no matter, I mean, because they're racist, because they're ignorant, whatever kind of thing. And so the opposite reaction is, well, we're going to eliminate Islam from the equation. Well, we can't,
Mhm.
because it's there. And I wish we would have I think, a more mature conversation about this and say, yeah, Islam is there, but out of 1.3 billion Muslims, whatever the hell the number is up to right now, 1.299 billion don't agree with that interpretation. But a very, very small sliver do. And they do cite the faith as the number one reason why they're doing what they're doing.
Well, and it forms the whole basis for their grievances
Yeah,
and the historical context, right? I mean, that's
exactly.
what they're using to motivate people. So if we're looking
Exactly.
to demotivate or de-radicalize, like we have to know that background, right? So
Yep. One of the key phrases you'll see here from a lot of groups is a phrase. It's in Arabic as a jihad fi sabilillah, which literally means jihad on the path to God. They really believe that what they're doing is not only um, good, but it's mandatory.
yes,
And there's another phrase they talk about jihad, which is a very complex term in Arabic. I recognize that, but they call jihad a fard ain, which is an individual obligation. In other words, you must do this. If you don't do this, you're not a true Muslim. Now, I'm not going to argue that that's what Islam represents, but this is the way that they're painting it, and they do try to convince their followers this is what your Creator wants you to do. Not only does He want you to do it, He's demanding that you do it, and if you don't do it, you're not fulfilling your faith.
yeah, it's fascinating how people kind of wrapped up in that. Um, I guess like an equivalent might be there was that book about like school teachers and stuff back when the Nazis were around, and they like converted them into the police, and then they went out and did
Yeah,
all kinds of
yeah.
atrocities. And how do we get these? It's called ordinary men. How do we get these
Mhm.
so-called normal people to just become mass murderers? And
Yeah.
maybe this is along the same lines.
Well, there's that famous experiment, was it in the 60s or 70s, where was it the Milgard experiment, where somebody basically took two groups of students, one were prisoners and one were sort of
Mm,
prison guards,
yeah,
and they were basically instructed to do whatever they needed to do, and these people would do things which they normally would not do, but given the circumstance, it was almost kind of like a psychological torture in some ways.
yeah,
And the study has been roundly criticized. First of all, can you imagine getting funding for that today? No, you wouldn't. You'd be fired on the spot. But what I think what it showed to some extent, and I'm not a psychologist, so I can't relate to its veracity or its believability, is that under certain circumstances, people will do extraordinary things. And I think a lot of what you refer to Nazi Germany, a lot of ordinary Germans ended up doing terrible things for all
yeah,
kinds of reasons. And maybe that's just human nature at some point.
yeah. Speaking of some people, though, we're gonna just talk about this one person in particular here, Kassem Dar.
Yeah.
Lived in Leduc. So just to kind of bring it a bit closer to home, especially for some of the listeners here, uh, we're talking about a guy who's radicalized and a major extremist uh, figure in Western Canada, and this was during the '90s. So can you talk a bit about this person? Because I've never heard of him till I read about him in the book.
Well, of course, Leduc's what 20 kilometers south of Edmonton, I believe, if memory serves me correct.
Yeah, roughly. Yeah.
like a bedroom community part of Edmonton, right?
Yep.
And so again, the one thing that always amazed me when I worked at CSIS is that, when people think of Canada, think, Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, those are the big, if you, Calgary, if you're lucky, because the Olympics, that kind of thing. But everything else is pretty well small potatoes,
Yep.
right? I mean, I'm from London. I have to keep saying London, Ontario people, not London, England. There's a London and Ontario. And what amazed me is, I mean, we would find these people in the incredibly out of the way places. I mean, we had a guy in Timmins, for God's sake, that we'll talk about him later, I think, as a foreign fighter. Timmins, Ontario, way up north, who converted to Islam and ended up fighting and dying for ISIS. It amazed me how many small towns and even like hamlets would produce these people, which really put a lot of pressure on your security services because you can't be everywhere, and you know that,
Yep.
right? You only got so many resources. So if you've got to devote people to Leduc, Alberta, or Timmins, Ontario, or the other one was God, there was a place in New Brunswick, I think it was called Petit Rocher, like population 6.5 or something. This really strains. You've got to, how do you run an operation in a place that's that small? So Qasim Dar was essentially, he was a guru in part of Western Canada. And there were three people in particular that were kind of his, I guess, his students, I would call them that. And they were all converts to Islam. And they became really important figures. One became an imam at a mosque, but they would produce reams and reams and reams of material to entice other people to join the cause. Qasim Dar himself was happy to sit back and essentially just kind of, spread the seed and talk to people and get them to do it. Now, eventually, he was Lebanese, came to Canada roundabout, I think through Colombia, if memory serves me correct. Anyhow, eventually he ended up back in Lebanon, and the Lebanese accused him of taking part in a plot, a jihadi plot in Lebanon, and he was arrested and he was convicted and he was jailed. And the best of my knowledge, he's probably still in jail. But I think for Qasim Dar, for me, I think the two things are Leduc, Alberta, small hamlet or smallish, and secondly that he was the brains behind the outfit. The analogy I like to use, Nathan, when we talked about sort of radicalization as a process, is there's generally a radicalizer. This is the person with the knowledge, with the personality, with the charisma. It could be online, it could be in your real life, and the people sort of get to know him, and they sort of enter into his circle. And the analogy I like to use is like bees in a flower. So the radicalizers are the flowers, and they're pretty, and they put up scent and pheromones, all this kind of stuff. And the bees they fly around, they land, they pick up stuff, they go off, and they come back, pick up more stuff. That's what radicalization is all about. Is that you've got to have somebody who knows his history, knows his culture, knows his religion, and more importantly, knows how to pass it on to others
Yeah.
in a way to get them to act because he himself is like not going to do anything. Now, again, in Qasim Dar's case, he was convicted of a terrorist plot later on in his home country of Lebanon. But we definitely had people that we saw that were just happy to be sort of the eminence grise, the gray eminence in the background, which is really challenging from a law enforcement security intelligence perspective. What do you charge them with?
Yeah.
They're not doing anything. There's no conspiracy to do anything. They're just planting the seed in someone else's brain and letting them go off and do it. So, and they would know how far to go because they know that we are limited. We can only charge based on the criminal code. And unless we get very creative with the kind of, if the Crown decides to, we'll go after this guy and maybe use this kind of approach as opposed to that one, really hard to lay a criminal charge on these guys.
Yeah. And I find maybe nowadays you kind of see that a bit more with all the screaming and shouting that goes on for almost every single topic. But you do get those people that they just really know how to package everything together and sell it, but they're not the ones out there getting their hands dirty. So, like,
Exactly.
that's where maybe sources, a lot of intelligence, all that comes in to see just how connected they are. But yeah, it's definitely it's a massive challenge with
Yeah.
all nowadays you see like hate speech, and it's like, well, what is hate speech? Who dictates what exactly that is, and
Yeah.
who are we going after, right? Around here, do you want to mention the Cotter family?
Yeah.
You had them kind of pop up throughout the book in different periods, but
Yeah.
I mean, you started with Ahmed Cotter and then later on Omar Cotter
Yeah.
uh, coming up. But yeah, I know you have strong views on the family.
I'm old enough. Nathan, you're probably too young to remember Welcome Back, Kotter. This was a television show, I think, in the 70s
I know the name,
about a
yeah.
teacher that yeah, a teacher that goes back to this, shitty school in, like, inner city New York kind of thing. He graduated from it and he went back as a teacher. It was a typical 70s sitcom, but no, these are different Cotters. So Ahmed Syed Cotter was essentially, for all intents and purposes, a lieutenant of bin Laden. He was a member of Al Qaeda, and they were Pakistani in origin. He and his wife Mahal Samna raised, oh God, they had 6 or 7 kids, and he basically raised them all as jihadis. And at one point, they were living in Afghanistan in an Al Qaeda camp. And so he elected to take his kids, his family back to Afghanistan. This is pre 9/11, to essentially be raised in a camp run by bin Laden and his crew. So clearly, they were part and parcel of the cause. And then Ahmed Syed Carter, the father, ended up being accused by the Pakistanis of taking part in an attack of terrorism in the 90s. And he ended up being hospitalized. I think he may have been injured either in the arrest or maybe during the attack. I forget the details there. And lo and behold, Jean Chrétien, Canadian Prime Minister, is in Pakistan on some kind of bilateral visit, and he visits Qatar in a hospital and convinces the Pakistanis to let him go. Here's this poor innocent Canadian. Why is he in a Pakistani hospital? Why is he suspected by the Pakistani security forces? And look, I don't trust the Pakistani security forces as far as I can throw them. I mean, they got they're riveted with all kinds of problems. But Ahmed Syed Cotter was not an innocent bystander that got swept up in some kind of campaign by law enforcement. He was a terrorist. He was a jihadist. And our prime minister somehow got the briefing from his officials or whatever that this Canadian need to be rescued. And so he was basically released. You can't make this shit up.
So he didn't talk to the intel people.
No, he definitely didn't talk to the intel people. And then fast forward, so most of the Americans end up picking up some of the kids. After 9/11, the youngest son, Omar Cotter, he was picked up and ended up in Guantanamo, where spent quite some time. And a friend of mine who was a CSIS intelligence officer, the Americans offered us the opportunity to go and talk to him, which we said, yeah. You for the record, I'm not a supporter. I think Guantanamo was a huge mistake. Guantanamo Bay was dumb, dumb, dumb. The Americans could have done it differently.
Mhm.
They were pissed off after 9/11, and for whatever reason, they decided to hold these people without charge for decades. Stupid move. And Omar Cotter ended up there. But put it this way: you're a security intelligence service. You've been told there's a Canadian who lived with Al Qaeda in the 1990s, and you're being given an opportunity to go and interview him.
Yeah.
Duh, of course you're going to interview him. What does he know? What does he know about possible plots in Canada? What does he know about possible Canadians linked to this? But because when he was arrested, he was 15 years old. He was seen as a young offender, and long story short, he eventually gets released back to Canada, and he sues the Canadian government, and you and me and every other taxpayer are on the tap for $10.5 million. To basically pay off an Al Qaeda terrorist that was picked up by the Americans. And did you notice the campaign to free Omar Cotter?
Mm.
The photograph they show of him is not the photograph of when he was picked up by the Americans. And he was 15 or 16, dirty, wild-eyed, wants to kill. In fact, he did kill an American medic.
Yep.
The photograph they show of him is when he's an innocent 12-year-old.
Yeah.
You think it was done on purpose to try and elicit people's sympathies kind of thing?
That's for every single person who ever gets killed or charged. They, as soon as if the family is involved, it's like the picture of their kid when he took his school photo, but not the 1,000 pictures of him waving guns around on
Exactly.
Instagram and stuff. It's like, okay.
My favorite. So I said my favorite Cotter moment. This is great. So another Cotter kid was eventually came back to Canada. I think they picked him up in Bosnia. He ended up getting back in Canada. And there are lawyers in Canada that love to defend jihadis. I don't know what it is, but they love to defend jihadis. And there's a Toronto lawyer called Rocco Galati who ended up defending. I forget which Cotter it was. I don't remember his first name. It doesn't matter. And so he gets back to Canada, and there's this news conference. And so the journalists are interviewing this Cotter, like, how's it feel to be back in Canada? Blah, 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 blah. And some journalist says, "So exactly where were you in Afghanistan in the 1990s?" And the kid says, "Kaldin." The journalist says, "Pardon? Kaldin? Oh, the Kaldin Al Qaeda camp. Yeah." And you see Rocco Galati's face. And this is a holy fuck moment.
Yeah.
Like, holy fuck. All of Canada now knows I'm defending an Al Qaeda terrorist kind of thing, right? Rocco Galati's star plummeted after that, is what I've been told. And but again, it just goes to show the naivete of people.
Hmm.
Like again, everyone and you as law enforcement, I'm sure obviously sure everyone has their day in court. You guys construct a case, you collect evidence to a certain standard. When it gets to the point where you have enough evidence, to lay a charge, you talk to the Crown, you lay charges, you go to court, you have a trial, blah blah blah. So I think we all agree with that. But the problem here, of course, is a lot of the information is intelligence, not evidence, and that's not the same thing in a Canadian court. They're collected at different standards, and CISA's information is not used in a criminal case in Canada because it's not collected at evidentiary standard. But the Carter family is a classic example of a family that basically lived under Bin Laden's tutelage and were members of Al Qaeda, and yet they've all been portrayed as these innocent Canadians.
Yeah.
And it's just it just it knowing what I know and knowing what you know, it bugs me that people are so stupid that these people are just wrong place at the wrong time. No, they're
All
terrorists.
their actions and things that come with that. But yeah, it's it's always like some sob story that gets them out of some sort of trouble. So yeah, I think we're kind of on the same page there.
I hope so.
So we're kind of moving to the 9/11 period. So
Yeah.
when 9/11 happens, can you tell us, where were you on that day, and then also, know, how that affected, we'll talk like grand scale, but what you saw, how that affected the intelligence community.
So 9/11 was a Tuesday, and I had a routine. I used to walk to work. When I joined the service, I was within walking distance, about 32-minute walk every day, and so I walked to work that morning. I used to go for a workout at the gym, and we had a gym on the premises. And I got up, and I turn my laptop on, and I do my scanning. I look into our database as to what had come in the previous day. Again, I'm focusing on Iran at this point. I'm an Iranian analyst at this point. And somebody tells me, "Oh, by the way, I don't know if you heard, but a plane just flew into one of the towers of the World Trade Center." And my immediate reaction was, it's happened. And some guy in a Cessna, he's lost control of his plane. There was some kind of technical malfunction because a few months ago, a guy, flown a plane into an office tower in Texas. I think it happens,
Yeah.
right? So I go down the hall to where we had a TV in a common room, and we're watching this smoke coming out of the tower. I don't know that it's an airliner. I just think it's just a small plane. And as we're watching, we see the other plane flying to the other tower, and this is a holy shit
Hmm.
moment. Like, this isn't a Cessna that's gone off course, or a guy that had a heart attack while he was at the controls. This is a full size Airbus, or whatever the hell it is, Boeing, flying into the World Trade Center. And it's like, oh my God. And we're just stunned. We're just stunned looking at this thing. And what happened in the hours ensuing is really quite fascinating. First of all, I got a phone call from my boss back at CSE saying, "Gurski, get your ass back here right now, because we need you to figure out just exactly what all this stuff means." And my colleagues, who were intelligence officers, they immediately went back to work and figured out, okay, what does this mean for Canada? Because once it became clear that this was not a random act, but this was a jihadi attack, and that became clear pretty quickly. Our number one concern at CSIS was very simple: were there any Canadians on those planes, and not passengers, the people who took over the planes? Because if, heaven forbid, there'd been Canadians behind 9/11, and we'd known about them, or worse, didn't know about them, could you imagine the impact on Canada-US relations?
Yeah.
The Americans would have said to us, "What the fuck is wrong with you people? Why is it you can't do investigations to prevent your citizens from boarding aircraft in Boston and New York and flying planes into buildings?" Just prior to 9/11, we had the infamous Ahmed Rassam case in 1999. There was a guy, Algerian Canadian, who tried to cross the border between British Columbia and Washington State with bombs to go to Los Angeles International Airport. He was the so-called Millennium Bomber, and he was gonna bomb the airport basically to coincide with the new millennium, with the year 2000. And he was caught thanks to a U.S. Border Patrol agent. But if he hadn't been caught, he would have driven through Washington and then through Oregon and then into California. Next thing you know, Canadian kills 300 people at LAX. And at the time, I remember hearing, I'd heard that the Americans told us, "This is not going to happen again.
Yeah.
We're not gonna make up for your mistakes." And so, fast forward to 9/11, our priority was to ensure that no Canadians were part of that. And at the end of the day, no Canadians were part of it. It was a failure of American intelligence, essentially, which did not stop Hillary Clinton as late as 2016 claiming that Canada was somehow behind 9/11 kind of thing, or Canadian jihadis were kind of thing. But it was an incredible time. And I think for me, it began. So I went back to CSC and I said, "Look, you're wasting my time. We're not doing counterterrorism. We have no intercept. We have nothing to help you. Let me go back to the service and help them." And that's when I think from my professional perspective, I started turning more from looking at Iran as a problem to looking at Islamist terrorism as a problem. And within 12 to 18 months of 9/11, I was full time on Islamist terrorism. So much so that they had to hire someone else to do Iran because I didn't have enough time to look at Iran at the same time. So it changed my career 100% in terms of my focus. And the reason you and I are talking today is largely because of 9/11.
And is that because like your focus changes from Iran to like a religion, right? We're talking a country to a religion. Is that just because it's so interconnected over there in the Middle East and then even worldwide? Like you have people radicalizing from down in the Caribbean, like it's just okay. We need a more holistic picture of what's going on in this world.
Yeah, I think partly. So, I mean, I because I was specialized in Iran. I hate the term expert because it's meaningless nowadays.
Mm,
Everybody's an expert. I understood very deeply how the Iranian Revolution happened and how Iranians were radicalized to support the revolution. So I understood the process of radicalization. And as you said, a lot of things are interconnected in the Middle East. Because I was also an Arabic linguist and because I studied Middle Eastern history, I looked at Iraq all through the 1980s and 90s. Iraq was one of my other specialties. And because I studied Islam in order to understand the culture in the Middle East, I already had a lot of the tools available. And I read Arabic. That was obviously very helpful as well. So it was a natural sort of, I think, a transition for me to look at Iran and the Middle East in general to Islamist terrorism more specifically. And then as counterterrorism became more of a priority for CSIS in the 2000s, more and more, we were doing more and more investigations on more and more individuals and groups. They needed somebody to take a look at that stuff and say, what does all this stuff mean? So, the role of an analyst at CSIS is, so the investigators, they're like the law enforcement officers, right? You do your investigations, you collect the information, you throw it in the box, and somebody has to take a look and say, what does all this stuff mean? Because people are asking us downtown, do we have a problem?
yeah.
Like 9/11 just happened. Is 9/11 possible here in Canada? For a lot of us, 9/11 was like kind of the first shoe. We were waiting for the other shoe to drop. We didn't think 9/11 was a one-off. And so my colleagues didn't go home for 2 to 3 months. They were flat out interviewing every bloody source we had and getting eyes on all of our targets to make sure there were no links to Canada. So they needed, I think, somebody to take a look at this from the sort of 37,000-foot level because officials are demanding to know the situation here. And my job was to translate all this operational material into something they could understand in 2 to 3 pages, because that's all that people read these days. And so I had to, liaise with the investigators, the intelligence officers, the IOs, talk to them daily on what they were seeing. And as the years went on, I was now being included in source debriefs
Yeah.
because of my background. They said, we need you in the room because you can ask questions we can't ask because of your knowledge. So, I wasn't recruiting human sources, but I was helping to train human sources in some ways. And that was cool because I'm just an analyst. Now I'm working basically as a quasi investigator. And that was neat because I could support my colleagues in their jobs and enhance my own knowledge at the same time. And yeah, I'm sure you've been, done this, right? Recruiting and running human sources is just cool stuff.
Yeah.
Where you're trying to get somebody prepared to actually infiltrate a cell or a gang, whatever kind of thing, to prevent bad things from happening. And that was a very, very, I think, I was very grateful for the opportunity to do that. It was something that I was very thankful for at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the areas that I'm more passionate about is dealing with informants. Just the amount of
Yeah,
stuff you can learn.
yeah.
It's probably one of the pieces of my career that I've learned the most from is talking to people who are involved directly in whatever it is you're trying to
Exactly.
figure out. One of the things you had in the book, and I'll just kind of read through this excerpt, is Canada's intelligence, police, and immigration departments, which we haven't even talked about really, but immigration departments have been warning the Canadian government for years that the world's major terrorist groups had established offshore bases in Canadian cities. This is a this is a huge issue right now when we're talking about China and some of the foreign influence pieces out there. What do you think? What's wrong in the sense of what are the intelligence services doing right in educating the government, but even the public, and what are they not doing right? Like, are we? I feel like okay, we can collect a whole bunch of evidence or intelligence, I should say, and put it together, and then send the report off. And when someone doesn't act on it, you know, what are we doing then? Or are we just leaving it at that step and saying, well, I did what I could? Like, well, there's got to be more, especially if we're talking about flying planes into buildings or some of these other attacks that have been attempted or have actually been successful. What have the Canadian intelligence and immigration and police been good at doing in education, but also failed at?
It's a great question, and I think that for some people, you hit the nail on the head. We've done our jobs. It's out of our hands right now. Canadians, and I'm including Canadian officials here, are extremely naive. They don't think it's going to happen here. They don't think that Canada's this great place. Everyone who comes to Canada is happy. They help make our country. We're multicultural. We're multilingual. All that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's all true. But it's not to say that there aren't people here who have agendas. And I think it's funny we're recording this in late September of 2023, Nathan, right after the alleged killing of a Sikh extremist in BC. The Sikh diaspora, and I just read an article just this morning, which I think paints a really good picture. It's actually on the CBC site. Sikhs in India don't give a shit about Khalistan.
Mm,
They're not looking for independence. The only Sikhs that care about it are all in Surrey.
yeah.
And that's typical for a diaspora. I'm sorry. Diasporas are communities that leave a country for a whole host of reasons. They go somewhere else. And what they do is in their new country, they keep to the same ideas and the same priorities as they had back home. Back home, people move on for all kinds of reasons. But the diaspora, it clings to those ideas. That's exactly what's happened amongst the
Mm,
Sikh diaspora right now. And Canada, wonderful country, we take immigrants from all around the world. A lot of people come here, they flee bad situations back home, and that includes terrorists, by the way. And because we're so naive here in Canada, they are successfully to create cells and groups to promote their causes. And part of it, I'm going to be cynical, but I think it's true. For officials, part of it's votes.
yes.
So if you're running for office in BC and your riding, whether it's provincial or federal, is largely made up of Sikh Canadians, do you think you've got the balls to talk about, why Khalistan's a bad idea? Or why Sikhs shouldn't have an independent homeland in the Punjab? Of course not, because you're going to lose the election.
Yeah.
I mean, it's same with Chinese interference, right? You're not going to go into ridings in Vancouver and try to say we should, crack down on China kind of thing, because you're going to lose votes in that riding kind of thing. So I think, and I don't mean to, reduce all politicians to this very shallow view of things, but clearly it is a consideration. For the leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, who happens to be a Sikh Canadian, to not have the courage to denounce Sikh extremism,
Hmm.
that speaks volumes to me. And a lot of officials are of the same ilk. I'm going to say what I need to say to get votes. I mean, it sounds kind of puny or kind of like, I don't know, not important, but it's the reality. And we just think of ourselves here in Canada. mean, what was that phrase that was important in the is it 2010s or late 2000s? The world needs more Canada.
Yeah.
What the fuck does that even mean?
Yeah.
You know, more Margaret Atwood? I don't know. Um, we no, I think Canadians just think that, bad shit is what happens over there. It doesn't happen here.
What a thing to weigh out, when you look at it. It's like votes, or I'll take the risk that people won't get blown up in in
Yeah,
dozens, hundreds, maybe even
yeah,
thousands if we're talking about flying planes into things. Like,
yeah.
what a crazy thing to think of, that you would even have to, I don't know, like, even pause and go, well, is it like, do I need to worry about this? I got to get some votes on my side, or this
Mm,
money from a group, or whatever it might be.
mm.
Yeah, just it's almost mind blowing to think that that's what it comes down to.
In the aftermath of Air India, the then Prime Minister Brian Mulroney issued an apology to India,
Mm,
despite the fact everybody on board, or the vast majority, were Canadian citizens.
yeah,
Doesn't that tell you something?
yeah,
Instead of cracking down on Sikh extremism in the lower mainland BC, yeah, speaks volumes to me.
yeah. You're not wrong. One of the things, and just along those lines, is uh, just talking about a bit about the effort, and uh, so, like I was saying, you get a bunch of intelligence, you package it up, you send it off, and these politicians get it, or whoever, that some decision makers. Now, when if they come back and say, like, "Hey, thanks for the you know more paper," uh, and they're not really doing anything about it, it is is there any obligation on the intelligence services, police, and even immigration, to try and go further? And I not to lead it down, like, not trying to give you leading questions, but um, we see, like, all this stuff about leaks from the intelligence
Yeah,
services, and
yeah,
to some extent, I can see why people do that, because they go, "Hey, if I'm telling someone 9/11's about to happen and they just blow it off, it's like, okay, well, like, something's gonna happen. I gotta tell people, and then you might get something out of that." But then again, we don't want everyone just, oh, just because someone told me, no, I don't agree with you. Well, that's not the time to just go start shooting everything off on the internet, right?
yeah.
So where do you kind of draw the line as to when your efforts stop to educate people or get this out there?
I'm with you. I don't support leaks in principle. I mean, when I, signed the dotted line way back in July of '83 on what was then the Official Secrets Act, I would not disclose
Mm,
sources and methods publicly. I took that seriously. I understand the frustration. I think part of the blame does lie with the security services in that we can make our point stronger. We can ask for more meetings with senior officials, whether or not they meet with us. I guess it's not within our power. But the one thing I think we could do a lot more of, and we started to do that in the sort of late 2000s, we can meet more with people outside of government. And by that, I mean the private sector. So one
yes.
thing we did really, really well, I think, after 9/11 is we started to have meetings with things like the energy sector to say, here's what we know about threats to your sector, whether it's technology theft by the Chinese, whatever kind of thing, or possible disruptions to services. Let me draw an analogy here for you, Nathan. You probably may have heard of the attack against a coastal gas link project in BC
Yep.
in April, I think, of last year. Never been solved, to the best of my knowledge. If I was a betting man, I would say the perpetrators were either environmental activists who didn't like the fact there is a new gas project in BC, or First Nations because it was on First Nation territory. It wasn't jihadis and it wasn't the far right. I'm pretty confident in that. So there is a threat to infrastructure. There's a threat to oil and gas because of the reasons we know: global warming, blah 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 blah. Um, Security services, I think, have an obligation to provide, not necessarily, Nathan Romas of 123 Main Street is going to attack your thing tomorrow, but they do have an obligation to sensitize people as to what the threat is. And we started to do that after 9/11. Was in Alberta many times talking to the oil and gas sector about threats to their infrastructure kind of thing. So I think we can do more of that. Secondly, I would say, and again, we're getting there, because we're talking more to media directly. So one of the jobs I had was to meet with reporters, with along with our communications branch personnel, and we would have honest conversations. Now, a lot of it was not for attribution; it was more like a backgrounder, you would call. But I met with some of Canada's leading national security reporters and said, "Okay, we're going to put our cards on the table. Here's what we're worried
Mm,
about. Here's what we're seeing," in a very generic kind of way. Again, not giving people's names and addresses, just to sensitize the media so that they could then go ahead and, in their own way, write up articles and op-ed pieces for media to tell Canadians. We can't go to Canadians directly because, I mean, how do you do that? So I think through the private sector and through journalists, that was our way to get our message out, and not just to government officials who may decide to ignore it. And as we saw in the last couple of months, the Prime Minister clearly ignored intelligence on China. Claimed he didn't read it, didn't like it, and called us racist for reporting on China, whatever kind of thing. And you can imagine the frustration, which I think led to the leaks to the Globe Mail, essentially,
mhm.
that we saw in the past couple of months. You don't want it to get to that point, but you're sitting on all this information, and your expectation is that the government of the day is going to do something with it. Either disclose, either you can disclose. We have disclosure methods for the RCMP where they can pick up the ball and run with it from a criminal perspective, or governments can make decisions. And when you realize they're not going to do dick with the information you have, the frustration builds, and as a consequence, some people take it into their own hands and decide, well, I'm going to call the Globe and Mail
Yeah.
and give them this information so that they can inform Canadians because the government's not doing it.
Yeah, I think that's a lot. That there are many good ideas in there. They're working with the private sector because then they start lobbying from their own
Yeah.
interests, but it's legitimate concerns, right? Um, the education of the public piece. There was a ad recently that was it CSIS or somebody put out, and then they used. I think they were criticized because the font in it, whatever Russia's font is. Have you seen this? No?
Uh,
Okay, I'll try and
no.
find it and send it to you. But it was like, almost like they were trying to put out some information about some, I don't know, influence or disinformation. It was a while ago, and I only half paid attention to it at that point. But yeah, it was just kind of funny. But it got me thinking, like, how can we educate the public so your citizens uh, are alive to these political issues? This is a conversation I've had with other people that are in different countries where you bring your 5-year olds to political rallies and stuff. Like, it's just much more a part of their culture to be so involved with the politics of things. But you get here and, like, you get people that are full grown adults and don't have a clue, like, about anything about government or how any of this runs. So it's a vastly different world. Um, yeah, no, but I think some good ideas.
Well, and sorry, on this line too. So my former organization CSE has gotten very, very aggressive in recent years on cyber threats.
Yeah,
So of course CSE now has the cyber command, and a guy I used to work with, Sami Khoury, he's head of the cyber center. He regularly, is responsible for giving out information to Canadians. Here's what a cyber threat is. Here's what it looks like. Here's what you should and shouldn't do. Don't click on this. Don't click on
yeah,
that. And the CSE that I worked for, oh God, never would have done that. So I tip my hat to them for being very, very, out there, forthcoming with Canadians because they're the experts. They're the ones that are, protecting. I see these figures. There were millions of attempts to attack our cyber on a daily basis, millions.
yeah.
And CSE is kind of the gatekeeper, right? And so for CSE to say, "Here's what you guys should do," yeah, way to go, guys, because you're the experts and you're the ones who should be telling us about this.
To kind of bring us back into going through the chronological stuff. The Toronto 18. So you mentioned it before. So there in your book, you talk about 4 major attacks that were foiled in Canada in this period from 9/11 to about 2013. The Toronto 18. Can you kind of run us through this because this is a pretty big one?
Yeah, this is huge. So this starts actually in 2005 when we come across an individual who basically there's a lesson here, Nathan. If you don't want to get picked up by law enforcement or the security intelligence services, don't call yourself something stupid online. And his online name is C4 explosive.
Oh,
Um,
good.
Not a really good
Yeah.
idea. Okay, because you're clearly giving off hints about something. And so this is a guy. His name was Fahim Ahmed. He had a young child with his girlfriend. Um, Young guy born in Pakistan or Afghanistan, rather, came to Canada as a young child. Anyhow, he was kind of the radicalizer. He was in high school in Toronto, and he was a radicalizer with a bunch of friends of his. And a long story short, between about August, September 2005 and June of 2006, he gathered together a group of 18 individuals. They ran a training camp up in just near Aurelia around Christmas of 2005. And they also called themselves Al Qaeda in Canada. Another thing you shouldn't call yourself if you don't want to get attention from the security services. And they had plotted 3 truck bombs, 2 in Toronto and 1 probably in Trenton, which is where which is the air base where a lot of soldiers are coming back from Afghanistan. And their raison d'etre, what they want to do was punish Canada for being in Afghanistan. They felt that Canada was there killing Muslims, and if we kill Canadians, they're going to stop doing that. But again, the Toronto 18 were dismissed as the gang that couldn't shoot straight. Oh, a bunch of teenagers, were they really serious? Yeah, they were serious. And by the way, when they were arrested, they were unloading 3 tons of what they thought was ammonium nitrate, but it was kitty litter because the RCMP substituted it. They don't take any chances at the last minute. And the trial took a couple years to hold. A bunch of them were released without charge eventually, or time served. And again, Canadians saw, oh, was this really serious? This couldn't have been all serious, but it was serious. And the only reason it was stopped was because it was a good CSIS case, which became a good RCMP case. At the end of the day, no one got hurt. And yet they're all out now, by the way,
Hmm.
the exception of one person. So you've got people convicted of plotting to set off 3 truck bombs. By the way, 3 one-ton truck bombs. And so that's 2006. They were probably convicted by 2008. So they did 15 years, and now they're deemed to be okay back in the Canadian society.
Wow.
Okay, fine. You know as well as I do, few people serve real life sentence. Life is not life in Canada, right?
Yeah.
Rarely do people serve life sentences. Are these people okay? Did they abandon their ideology? They say they have. They wanted a second chance. Fine. But what program did they undergo in prison? Have they really abandoned these ideas? Because I know of cases, one of the Toronto 18 did his time, was released, and a year later got on a plane and went to Somalia and ended up dying fighting for Al Shabaab.
Hmm.
Okay. But here's a guy that clearly didn't drop the program. He believed in it. In fact, he stole his cousin's passport to leave Canada. So is it possible these people really have, undrunk the Kool-Aid? Yeah, it is. But as somebody who worked in security intelligence, my bottom line is, can you prove this person no longer poses a threat to Canadian society?
Yeah, I guess you never really know. Um, and even with this case, so you mentioned Mubin Sheikh and his
Yeah.
role in this whole part as an agent. And his story's out there, so people can go look him up. He's in
Yep.
the is it Washington Spy Museum, like down in the
It's the International
U.S.
Spy Museum, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, he's in there. He's obviously worked a number of different cases, and he goes around uh, the world talking to people about this stuff. So he's been on the podcast as well. Very interesting story. So,
And he suffered personally. He
mhm,
was seen as a traitor to his community. I'm sure he's told you that.
yep,
Here's a guy that stood up to agree to work for CSIS as a source, and then he also agreed to become an agent. Now, they're different things. Your informants and our sources are different things, right? In your case, an informant can in fact be asked to testify if it goes to court. CSIS sources don't testify; they don't go to court. And in many cases,
ours is the agent. Agents go testify.
yeah. And so, in many cases, people that agree to work as sources for CSIS will not agree to work for law enforcement because they don't want that possibility of being on the stand. And I understand that, right?
Hmm.
But Mubin, he took one for the team. And as a consequence, he was called a traitor. He was called an enemy of the community. And here's a guy who infiltrated this cell, provided us with top notch intelligence, later evidence that was used in court. And it's thanks to Mubin, in part, this thing never went anywhere. And yet he was seen as somebody who had somehow failed his community. Like, how could you accuse him of being that?
Mm.
Like he did his duty to average Canadians. And yet people saw him as, oh, you became one of them. You're like one of those white folk. You worked for CSIS and the RCMP. You shouldn't have done that. You should have, maintained your status with the community. I don't understand that mentality, why somebody would say that, but moving and it's funny, I never knew moving. I knew we had a source, but source information, and maybe it's the same with law enforcement. This stuff is held very, very closely. People's names and there's, what they do. You gotta protect them
Yeah.
because in, worst case scenario, they found out they get killed. So I didn't know Mubin when he was our source, but I met him years later, and we become very good friends actually. And I have a lot of time for Mubin, and I tip my hat to what he did for Canada and for Canadians.
Yeah. Yeah, I suggest people check out his story. You can find him on LinkedIn is where kind of I linked up with him,
Yeah,
but his stuff's out there. It's really good. One of the
yeah,
things
it
I
is.
wanted to ask you too on this is you got to meet with some of these people from this group in person, um, and without disclosing like any, I guess, secrets or anything, but more the mindset of these individuals. Uh, what was it like talking to them? And is it possible to have a regular conversation, or are they always just telling you how they want to kill you and you're the you're the devil or whatever it is they might say? What is it kind of what's talking to any of these people like?
So I met 4 or 5, convicted jihadis in prison, 1 in Quebec and 4 in Ontario. It's an interesting thing. So they either know or they assume who you are. This person shows up kind of thing. So I'd be in the presence of an investigator as well. And essentially, it's kind of to judge the mindset. So this is years after they've been convicted. They spent so much time in prison, and their prison staff make us available to talk to them. And all I'm trying to do is try to sense, okay, are you the same person you were when you were arrested for plotting to kill people, kind of thing. And it varies, and I'm sure you maybe come across this as well. They say that everybody in prison is innocent,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Nobody's actually guilty. The court found me guilty, even though that it was a shitty case or someone lied, kind of thing. I found with terrorists, it was actually quite different. In some cases, I honestly felt that people probably had turned a corner. They realized, I can't believe what I was going to do, and I realized the error of my ways. In some cases, they get counseling, whether it's psychologists or religious figures or whatever, or prison staff. And over a period of time, they realize that they took a wrong path and they regret it and they want to make up for it.
Well, I wonder at what point do they realize that? Like you're an for me, it's almost unfathomable that you could get wrapped up into such a crazy plot in the first place. Like you're a grown adult. So it's just, yeah, I find that hard.
Well, remember talking about radicalizers before, right? I mean, you're under the guise, you're under the influence of a radicalizer, and this person interprets world events for you.
Hmm.
And this person tells you this is what your creator wants you to do. You have no choice. You're the hero. You're going to save us from our enemies, the West, whatever kind of thing. At the end of the day, you buy the story.
I could see it more if you're born into that and that's what you've been taught since like day one. But for and even then, it's not to excuse it, but for the people who just convert, I'm in my 20s and now I'm just going to go off and do this. It's like you have to have some real psychological, like there's stuff missing for you to gauge these things. Like you're missing a lot of skills.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
Yes and no. I think obviously people who convert to a faith are in search of something. There's something not right with their life. They're not happy,
Mhm.
whatever. They've had a bad relationship, whatever, and they're trying to find meaning in life. This is why they convert from no faith to a faith, or convert from faith A to faith B. The problem with converts, of course, is that they know squat. So if I convert to Hinduism tomorrow, as I said earlier, I know nothing about Hinduism. My belief, I'm in your hands. You're the guy who's going to lead me down this path. You're going to provide me with literature, with explaining what this stuff means. Who are the figures? You know, what is the faith teaching me? What are our tenets? What are our beliefs? I have no choice but to believe you because you're the guy that you're the keeper of the key here. You're telling me what to do. And this is why we find so many converts are really important members of terrorist cells because they don't know anything. And if they're in the hands of a radicalizer, that person dictates the extent of your knowledge. So if I don't know anything and you're a bright guy and you're charismatic and you have my best interest in heart and you want to save my soul, my everlasting soul, of course I'm going to believe you.
Yeah.
And if you tell me, oh, by the way, Phil, this is what you have to do to save your soul, what am I going to fall back on? What possible knowledge can I use to counter you?
So on that, I think this is a really good conversation because this is like trying to work toward the root of the problem. Um, for me, and I would say this is even before I was a police officer because people say, "Wow, you're just a cop. You're just suspicious of everybody." Fact, but even before that, if like say you are born into Canadian society, you grow up with probably generally it's going to be some sort of like Christian morals and values. Like
Yep.
that's what you'll know whether you go to church or not. It's just that's the day to day interaction in life. So don't kill people, right? That's one of them. Uh, Now you have someone who comes to you and says like, God or whoever is telling you to kill these people and so on and so forth. But like, how do you actually, one, not question that, two, take that as like the lone source? Like, you're like, this guy's kind of saying something. Maybe I should check if there's any other views. And three is just how do you buy into it wholeheartedly
Yeah.
enough? So and this is just me going on a bit of a rant, not expecting you to
No,
answer all that,
I get it. Yeah.
but it's just the psychology involved in it is
Yeah.
like uh, so immense. Like I just don't even know how to grasp it all.
I don't think any of us do, to be
Yeah,
honest. I think, clearly, like I said, these are people, and I think your earlier comments are probably spot on. These people need something. They're in search of something. Something is not working out well in their life. And, in the vast majority of cases, they convert and they find happiness, and then Bob's your uncle and everything works out well. But it's this notion that I'm at rock bottom. I, I don't know where to go.
hmm
And you have the way of saying, well, hey, Phil, I'm going to help you. I can see you're suffering. And I know you're wondering what to do with your life, and you know what's important and what's not, and what's going to happen to me, and I'm going to help you there.
yeah.
Oh, and by the way, this is what you need to do to save your everlasting soul and to help the people around you. Yeah, I think it's really complicated.
And it's this speaks to a point near the end of the book about you're talking about the de-radicalization programs and those being actually one of the best places for these groups to try and infiltrate and use to radicalize the people. So, and I think that speaks exactly to the point that you're getting at here, where you're saying these are people in search of something. So even if you were radicalized and you believed in whatever twisted view of Islam that you had, you're now back. You're almost like taking a step back to where you're like, hey, I now need something again
Mhm.
because I'm trying to leave that thing behind, whatever the twisted view is. And then these people come in again and give you that, right? Like
Yeah,
it's kind of a crazy twisted world that way.
yeah. It's like everything I was okay. If you're in a DRAD program, what you're being told is everything you were told was a lie.
Yeah.
This is not the Islam that is recognized as the true Islam. And these people led you down the wrong path, and look what happened. So you think, okay, well, first of all, you feel stupid. Like, how could I not see this was the wrong version? What have I done? Kind of thing. And then again, you're back to the very beginning, square one. Now what's left for me? And for some people, they just they end up on the same pathway again, anyhow.
Mm.
And I've seen people, and I can think of one case particular, one young woman in Canada who went from faith to faith to faith because she couldn't find the answers in any given faith. And at the end of the day, she ended up becoming a jihadi.
Yeah.
But she tried Buddhism, she tried Christianity, she tried all kinds of stuff, and she ended up being a propagandist for a major jihadi website. So yeah, so DRAD. I mean, I appreciate. I've talked to hundreds of de-radicalization people. I've seen their programs. I appreciate their efforts, but I'm sorry, as an old Intel guy, my bottom line is you can't guarantee 100% that what you've done is working.
Yeah.
And so, as a consequence, my default position is this person still represents a threat
Yeah. And I
until
guess
such time as they don't.
that person probably whether they feel it or not, maybe they'll to an extent they feel like they got to kind of continually answer for that, right? And continually
Yep.
every day I got to wake up and go and tell people not to do this, or tell people
Yep.
to, about the harms of whatever view I believed in. So yeah, no, I agree there. It's definitely a difficult position to be in, and it's hard to find a program that be 100% can guarantee anything. So,
Yep.
um,
And I've met some far right people in Canada who de-radicalize, and they be basically on the road trying to de-radicalize others. And again, kudos to you for trying. I like it kind of thing, but I always draw the distinction between de-radicalization and disengagement. So they're very different meanings. Disengagement means I'm not doing this anymore, but it doesn't suggest there's nothing about your mindset. I can still have the ideas. I'm just choosing not to act on them anymore. Disengagement's good. That means you're not going to blow shit up. But the problem is if you're disengaged without truly having de-radicalized, you can then re-engage at some point.
well,
And that's the challenge for law enforcement, security
yeah,
intelligence.
comes back to essentially the criminal side. It's like
Yeah.
the mens rea and actus reus,
Yep.
right?
Exactly. Exactly.
So I wanted to get to the Canada Day plot because
Yep.
in the book you say this is the most satisfying and most frustrating file for you. So can you kind of run us through that file
Sure.
and then what that means for you?
Okay. This is in 2013. Or in 2013, we came across a couple out in BC in Victoria. John Nuttall and Amanda Carodi. They're both converts, both, I believe, ex-drug addicts. They converted to Islam, and then we realized they're starting to, again, they were angry at Canada's foreign policy. This is a typical theme with jihadis. Canada's in Afghanistan. They're killing Muslims. I got to do something about it, kind of thing. And so Kurodi and Nuttall began to talk about bombing things. They wanted to bomb Esquimalt Naval Base on Vancouver Island. And so they're ramping up. And so at this point, again, as typical in a case, when it gets to that criminal threshold, it's no longer a CSIS matter. CSIS is a security intelligence organization, not a law enforcement agency. We have a mechanism whereby we can say to the RCMP, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, Nathan's a problem. And so the case was handed off to the RCMP in the spring of 2013, and they ran with it, and they developed their own informant, an RCMP officer, as it turns out, was acting as an informant. And, he followed these people, he met with them, and they were talking about all these plans. They were inspired by the April 2013 Boston Marathon attack. You remember that one? This was the Tsarnaev brothers, who were, I think, Uzbeks or something like that. And they planted pressure cooker bombs up near the finish line of the Boston Marathon. Killed 3 and I believe wounded 250, if memory serves me correct. And they were jihadis. The one Tsarnaev was killed by law enforcement. The other was arrested and ended up serving a life sentence. I think he's still in prison. Anyhow, so Karodi and Nuttall looked up online about building a pressure cooker bomb. Apparently, any idiot can build a pressure cooker bomb. It's not rocket science.
Hmm.
And so they plan to detonate 3 of them on the grounds of the legislature in BC and Victoria on Canada Day. So national holiday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or so. And the grounds are crowded with families celebrating Canada Day, picnics, all that kind of stuff. And so they went back to their apartment and they had a remote, they were going to detonate with their cell phone, and they hit the button and nothing happened. And that's when they were arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit terrorism. So essentially, because of the RCMP informant, they were not real bombs. Of course, they were just made to look like real bombs. Brody and Nuttall didn't realize that. And as a consequence, nothing happened. So they went to trial and they were found guilty by jury of conspiracy to commit terrorism. The judge didn't like it.
Hmm.
She found that the RCMP entrapped them, and so as a consequence, she threw the charges out. And they went to appeal courts, and the appeals court agreed with the judgment. And then but by the way, they're now suing us for like, I don't know, gazillion dollars or some goddamn thing, because their lives were affected by the RCMP. I testified for the Crown in the original case in which the jury found them guilty. And the fact that this judge found them that they are entrapped, I mean, A, she's ignorant. B, she has no idea how law enforcement works. And, it's this notion that Amanda Karodi and John Nuttall were innocent Canadians randomly chosen by the RCMP to get a victory.
Hmm.
That's the story that's being told right now. And I'm thinking, okay, let's reverse engineer this. Let's assume that CSIS wasn't aware of them back in the spring of 2013 and didn't inform the RCMP, so they couldn't put an informant against them. They could have easily looked up the recipe for a pressure cooker bomb on the internet and created one. May not have been very good, but it could have been they could have carried it out.
Yeah.
And so instead of talking about the non-attack of July 1st, 2013, we're talking about the attack that killed 5 people and wounded 20,
Hmm.
all because we didn't have eyes on these people. In actual fact, it was a carefully managed plot. Now, you worked informants, you know more about the law enforcement, and I know there's rules on what you can and cannot do, right?
Yeah.
You can't put ideas in people's heads that aren't already there. It has to come from them. And as the informant, you're kind of encouraging them, right? Because and challenge them. And I've seen the tapes at several points. The informant says, "Are you sure you want to do this?" I think that may be a requirement. I'm not sure of how law enforcement works. And they said, "Yeah, we want to do this." I said, "Okay, well, I'm here to help you if you need to do it." That's exactly what happened. How the hell is that entrapment?
Yeah.
They plotted an act of terrorism.
Yeah, I think it's just when they're saying that they're trying to show or confirm, they're doing this of their own free will. No one's
Exactly.
not duress, and no one's holding a gun to their
Ex-
head and saying you have to do this. So
Exactly.
yeah,
And that's exactly what happened. And now, like I said, they're out. And again, going back to Omar Khadr, if you see the pictures of Nuttall and Karoti, in every picture, he's got his head up against her shoulder. He's looking all innocent. And we were just, two innocent Canadians that the RCMP wanted to make an example of. We never would have done this on our own. Or shit, you would have done it if you had the chance. And you were found guilty by a jury of your peers.
and it's
The
almost
judge decided that the charges shouldn't stick.
and it just seems almost impossible for a police service or any of these services to create a scenario that big with that many actors and convince all these people, like, and not one person anywhere at any point comes out and says, "Hey, they're doing some bad business behind the scenes." Like it just and with especially nowadays with the amount of oversight
Yeah, yeah,
that police have,
exactly.
uh, it'd be almost impossible.
So anyhow, the Kuroti and Nuttall were jihadis. They wanted to kill innocent people, and it was an excellent intelligence slash law enforcement investigation, and no one got hurt. And yet, at the end of the day, this judge decided that there was no there.
Mm,
As a consequence, they're now suing us.
yeah,
Go figure.
the usual path of things. So,
Yeah, but again, the media plays a role here because they buy it, and the fact that again, good old John, he's got these little puppy dog eyes. Me and Amanda were just walking down the street one day, and we got picked up by the RCMP, and
yeah,
people believe that shit.
yeah.
Drives me nuts, Nathan. I'm sorry.
Well, that leads us into the post 2013 era. So that file didn't make you leave the job, but
No, no,
um, so we're kind of coming up to the the latter half of things here, though. Post 2013,
no,
this is where maybe we want to talk about obviously the attacks at Parliament Hill and the memorial. Uh,
no.
if you could kind of run us through a couple of those,
Sure.
and then we'll kind of end these periodic pieces with one of the female examples,
Yeah,
because I
yeah.
want to make sure everyone gets their equal rights here. So we're not
That's
going to leave
right.
the females out. But yeah,
It's actually quite astounding that between 2014 and 2019, we had, I think, 5 or 6 successful attacks in Canada. Luckily, nothing on a grand scale. So quickly in 2014, in October, on the 20th, a convert named Martin Couture-Rouleau ran over 2 members of the Canadian Armed Forces in a parking lot south of Montreal, killing one, Patrice Vincent, and injuring another. He ended up leaving the scene. He rolled his car, came out running at police, and they shot him dead. He was a convert to Islam, again, angry about Canadian forces in Afghanistan. 2 days later in Ottawa, Michael Zahapipo, who wanted to become a foreign fighter. Oh, by the way, Couture Rouleau wanted to leave Canada to go join Al Qaeda or Islamic State, and his passport had been seized. And he met with police, and he said, "Oh yeah, that was a dumb idea I had. I don't know what I was thinking. Thank you for meeting with me. I'm okay now." And 3 weeks later, he killed Patrice Vincent in his car. Zahapi wanted to go fight in Libya, couldn't get his passport, said, "Fuck, if that's the case, I'll just do it here." And he's the one who shot Nathan Strillo at the National War Memorial. got into his car, went to Parliament Hill, got as far as the front door of the center block, was shot by parliamentary police, kind of thing. He also wanted to punish Canada. Again, it's not a coincidence that two military soldiers died in 2 days. It's all about the Canadian forces in Afghanistan and that they were killing Muslims.
Hmm.
Then we had an attack outside of Edmonton in 2017 where a guy ran over an Edmonton cop outside of Commonwealth Stadium. He was directing traffic after an Eskimos game and ended up driving on Jasper Ave. He ran over four people, wounding them. Another jihadi wanted to punish Canada for its foreign policy. Rahab Dugmash was in Toronto. She went into a Canadian Tire store. She had actually got as far as Turkey to join ISIS and and was sent back by Turkish authorities. Came back to Canada. I can't do it there. I'm going to do it here. Went to a Canadian Tire, picked up a golf club of all things, and she had an ISIS thing around her head. And she ended up wounding a couple of employees that was there before she was eventually, and then she was convicted of terrorism as well. Attack on a Canadian Forces recruiting base in Markham around the same time. So yeah, we've had a number of cases. We had Aaron Driver, who was a convert in, of all places, Stratford, Ontario in 2016. And he was did a video. And I remember an RCMP colleague of mine, the Americans found the video saying, we think this guy's Canadian. And an analyst at RCMP said, holy shit, that's Aaron Driver. They were aware of him. They sent forces to Stratford. He was getting into a cab.
Yeah.
And he was going to go to London, Ontario, and probably the Union Station, I think, was the attack. He had two bombs. He detonated one in the back of the cab. It was a shitty bomb. It didn't do anything. He came out of the cab and then he was shot dead, basically by law enforcement. So in the span of 4 or 5 years, we had all these jihadis, many of them converts, trying to attack Canada for its perceived crimes against Muslims abroad. And they all took place, bang, 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 no pun intended, in various parts of Ontario and Alberta.
I think the one there about the female Rahab is
Yeah.
interesting in that you don't see too many of the females taking part in the direct violence. Maybe overseas, like I've heard lots of stories talking to military guys, like females might carry a
Yeah.
bomb or something and walk toward a group of
Yeah.
soldiers, but as for like actually carrying out a physical attack on citizens
Pretty
somewhere.
rare.
So
It's pretty rare.
yeah, and one of the, I guess, two questions I have might be a bit unrelated, but one is, so with the female, it says she had ISIS flag tied around her head, and while she was carrying out this attack, she's screaming, "This is for ISIS." At what point is it like all mental health are not necessarily ISIS, but all ISIS are mental health? Like, you see where I'm going with that? Like,
Yeah.
it's like, how do we know this person's not just
Yeah.
some wingnut who picked something up on the weekend and said, I'm
Yeah.
just going to do this. Like, this looks cool or fun or whatever in my world. And then I'm just going to go run and scream these things. It's like, well, you're not really uh, uh, ISIS, right? And then maybe the
Yeah.
group doesn't necessarily take ownership of them. And I think that was part of the thing, the part of the argument with the guy in Edmonton who was running people over is, well, there's an ISIS flag on the dashboard, but is this ISIS or is this just the crazy guy, right?
And they're great questions. And I think for a lot of average Canadians, the assumption is if you do something like this, you've got to be mentally ill. And no sane person would do this.
Yeah.
And the guy in Markham was actually found now guilty for mental health reasons. I think the judge found he had schizophrenia or something. But the judge also found that in Canada, I don't know how he got this, but one person cannot be a terrorist because a terrorist group can't be one person. I don't know how we got this logic. It's twisted logic. But anyhow,
Mm.
the problem is, I mean, and you know as well as I do, Nathan, mental health is a huge issue in criminality as well. Okay. The problem is that there's nothing to support the contention that the vast majority of terrorists are in fact mentally ill.
Yeah.
Now we're talking how do you diagnose it? I mean, how do you diagnose mental illness? We've all got mental issues. How do you diagnose mental illness? That's one of the number one challenge in our findings. Yeah, people may have mental issues, but doesn't mean they're mentally ill. Meaning they can be responsible for their actions. And you know as well as I do in the Canadian criminal system, if you are suffering from a certain illness, you can be found not guilty because you can't make that decision. You're not mentally stable enough to do that. But it is my contention, and I'm not a psychiatrist, psychologist, I'm not a mental health specialist. The vast majority are not, in fact, mental ill. even if they have mental issues, whatever that's supposed to mean.
You just have different beliefs, right? You believe
Exactly.
this view of the world.
Yeah,
It doesn't make you
exactly.
yeah, yeah.
So in the case of Rahab Dugmaj, here we have an individual who got as far as Turkey to go and become a bride of ISIS, whatever kind of thing. So she had the wherewithal to get as far as Turkey, and she came home, and she didn't let go of the cause. She had been thwarted in her desire to do it over there, so she decided to do it. Even her husband was concerned about her. He knew that she had this ideology. So to me, it suggests a determination that is well beyond somebody who is mentally ill. I mean, again, I got to be careful here because this is not my specialty. But you look at the extent to which people do this over a period of time, and could a person who was truly mentally ill, would they be capable of doing that? I don't know. I'm guessing not, but again, I don't want to step into that because it's not that. The guy in Edmonton, yeah, he clearly planned this for many months. We knew that because he was working at a meat processing plant somewhere south of Calgary, and we had sources in there telling us he was talking jihad all the time.
Mm.
So again, this wasn't a spur of the moment kind of thing. This is planned over a period of time. And again, could somebody with a serious mental illness have the wherewithal to plan something over several months? And I think the answer is no. But again, I'm gonna leave that to somebody who's more qualified to talk about it. But I think we need to get away from this default position that a person who commits an act of terrorism must, in fact, be mentally ill because a normal person wouldn't do that. It's a failure to understand their mentality. They have different mentalities than we do. We don't understand the mentalities, and therefore we make the assumption that it must be somebody who is clearly not playing with a full deck. But that's a very dangerous assumption to make.
Yeah, and it allows people to just kinda slough things off and go like,
Yeah,
"Oh, it's
yeah,
just mental illness, whatever," and
yeah,
then completely ignore it, right? And it's like, okay,
yeah,
you're not appreciating the seriousness of this, and,
exactly.
I think we forget too, there are a lot of people out there, and I do mean a lot, I don't have a number, but there is a lot of people that intend to do us harm, and
Yep,
we just yeah, I don't know, maybe things are just too peaceful that we forget that and it's not, top of mind. It's not for people to walk around and be paranoid, but you should still be vigilant and pay attention to
exactly.
things, right?
I think we have a hard time seeing this as normal, and yet for these people, this is normal. This is normal behavior.
Yes.
It's not our normal, but it's their version of normal. So again, my caution is don't just jump to the conclusion that somebody has to be mentally ill to be capable of doing something along these lines.
Yeah. And then the other question I was thinking was what do you see as the obligation of us to prevent people from leaving? So if they say, I want to go
Yeah.
train at this super cool new Al Qaeda base, like why are you stopping me? Also, if we know somebody's going to go do that, why aren't we charging them with something ahead of time? Like if we're going to stop them from going,
Yeah.
maybe we shouldn't just turn them around and say, okay, get back into Canadian society. So
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I'm not sure of the what the most recent interpretation of the criminal code is. We do have a list of what are called listed entities. These are terrorist groups that Public Safety Canada maintains. But my understanding, and this is based on conversations with colleagues, this is more from a financing perspective. So if I send a check to ISIS and ISIS is a listed terrorist entity, I could be charged with terrorist financing. It's not clear to me what they can be charged with under the Canadian Criminal Code, but I haven't memorized all the paragraphs of Section 83.01. And after that, it seems to me you're absolutely right. If I express the intention to travel, leave Canada, join a terrorist group, I should be charged with the intention of leaving Canada, join a terrorist group. But I've never heard of a single case um, to date along those lines. Sometimes it's because we're not aware of it. People do leave and we're not aware of them. That's happened.
yep.
But in cases, like I said, we've had the two cases in 2014. We knew people were going to go abroad to join terrorist groups, and so we took their passports away, but we didn't charge them under the criminal code. We just prevented them from leaving the country, which I think is our responsibility. As I said earlier, Canada should not be seen as a net exporter of terrorists.
Yeah.
And I talk in the book an awful lot about attacks carried out by Canadians. Hundreds of people have died because of attacks by Canadians abroad. So we have an obligation not to do that. But you would think that if we take their passports away, can't we go one step further and charge them under the criminal code? One would think that would be the case, but maybe it comes down to what evidence do you have in it? And is the case, as well as I do, the Crown may decide, yeah, we're not going to win this case. It's not strong enough. So we're not going to bother laying charges in the first place.
What about, and I know you have opinions on this here, is what to do with foreign fighters and repatriating them?
I've been very adamant since day one, and I've been called all kinds of nasty things as a consequence.
Yeah.
If you're arrested in country A for having joined a terrorist group and or taken part in acts of terrorism abroad, that country has every bloody right to put you on trial, even if their justice system isn't, as shall we say, advanced as ours here in the West, like Syria or Iraq. I personally don't believe in the death penalty. That's just my own personal feeling because I don't think it solves anything. But if you're arrested in Syria for doing a crime, and in Syria, the penalty for that crime is death, who the hell am I to tell the Syrians, piss off? It's not my goddamn business. If you don't want to be put to death in Syria, don't commit a crime for which the penalty is death in Syria. This is not rocket science. A lot of people say, oh, these poor Canadians are being held abroad in terrible conditions. No, it sucks to be them. They shouldn't have gone there in the first place. It's, I don't understand this feeling of, oh, these poor people need to be rescued by Canada. Nathan, I've traveled to Singapore quite a few times, and Singapore is an interesting country. First of all, it's a city country. It does very well, and but Singapore has some very strict laws on drugs. And when you get off the plane in Singapore and you're going to get your luggage, you go along this walkway, and there's this sign. It's got to be 3 meters by 2 meters that you cross, and the sign says the penalty for drugs in Singapore is death. If you're found guilty of dealing drugs, it's the death penalty in Singapore. And Singapore has put to death foreign nationals.
Yeah.
Who've complained. You send us back. No. Well, they were caught in Singapore doing drugs, and our penalty is death. So it sucks to be them. And I'm thinking, they got a point. Like, if you don't want to be put to death in Singapore, don't deal cocaine. Like, again, this isn't a complicated, scenario. So all these Canadians that are being held in so-called refugee camps or whatever, prison camps in Iraq and Syria and Kurdistan, why in heaven's name should I spend a dime of taxpayers' money to bring them back? My only exception is the children, because children were often brought as part of families, and the children had no say in going to join ISIS.
Yeah.
But I've gone one further, and again, I've been criticized. These children should be removed from their parents. Any parent who brought their child to join ISIS is by definition an unfit parent. And I'm sure you've worked on cases in police, Nathan, where you're in a situation where a child is in danger. Sexual exploitation, physical abuse, mental abuse. And I'm not sure what part of the Health Services Act in Alberta, whatever it is, but I'm guessing you have an obligation to remove that child if it is your belief the child is in danger. How is this any different?
You can do all kinds of things. You could do a warrantless search of a house if you believe a child's in danger. So
Exactly.
you have many, many powers when it comes to kids.
And I think it's the same thing here. And people said, well, you're advocating kidnapping. No, I'm advocating removing a child from mom and dad who think joining ISIS is a good idea. Oh, and by the way, the children are being indoctrinated while they're over there. They're called the lion cubs of the caliphate, and they're being trained to be the next generation of terrorists. You're telling me those children shouldn't be taken back to Canada? Absolutely. They should be brought back and put with extended family, or if there's no extended family, they become wards of the state, which is not ideal. But it sure as shit is better than sitting in a refugee camp where ISIS is running the camp.
And it just speaks to, I would kind of say it's the shallowness of the people who see these people as the victims, when it's like,
exactly.
Okay, you're over there and you're joining these groups. Well, what about the families that they're killing soldiers of or blowing things up and like
or enslaving? The Yazidis were kept as sex slaves.
Yeah. But we need to say, woe is that one person who flew over there with the intention of doing these things.
Yep.
And it's like you're saying, like they got this big board up, and like, well, what do you need? Like a new 10 commandments over there that says like, don't behead, don't blow things up, like when you're getting off the plane or the train.
But it's worse than that.
Yeah.
You've got people here who present, I guess I use the word victim, and I like you to use this word. The victims are the terrorists. And, I didn't know I was getting into. Well, hello, Google it. There's this thing called Google, and you can put in words in, or even ask Alexa for Christ's sake. What is ISIS kind of thing? It's like, oh, I didn't know what I was getting into. Well, yeah, I didn't know I was selling cocaine, so I'm innocent. Like, what kind of excuse is that? There was a court case here in Ottawa recently, and I couldn't believe it. Some families or representatives went to court to try to force Canada to repatriate these people. And nowhere in the testimony was it said these people want to join a terrorist group. The case that was the lawyers put forward, they weren't stupid. They called these people. The case was called BOLO, BOLOH, bring our loved ones home.
Mm,
These are people that joined ISIS,
yeah.
and they're looked at as poor loved ones. And you know what, Nathan? The judge found in favor of them. But luckily, an appeals court said, no, we're not bringing them home. So it's just, these people they're denying responsibility. They're denying they did anything wrong. They were hoodwinked. They were naively led to do this. And I'm thinking, you probably heard of the Shamima Begum case in the United Kingdom. This woman who went over and she's still stuck there. UK says, sucks to be you, sweetheart. You're not coming home. They removed her citizenship, actually. Um, it's just like, it's not my fault. Like, at what point do people assume responsibility for their actions?
That's a common theme I have here all the time. It's just, yeah, people are just absolved. You're allowed to just go through life oblivious to everything
Yep.
and then just claim
Yep. Not
ignorance.
my fault. Yep. Not my fault. And so, oh, by the way, prediction: if these people, which they probably will come home eventually, get ready for the $10 million lawsuits.
Well, and that's the other thing. Okay, we're going to bring them back and we're going to end up paying them.
Yep.
So not only do you spend the taxpayer money to bring them home and fight a whole thing
Yep.
in that respect,
Yep.
now you're also going to probably pay them on the back end.
Oh God, big time. Omar Khadr's laughing all the way to the bank, his old man having joined Al Qaeda.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'd keep you here all day if I could, but we'll get to that. So we're kind of done with talking about the chronology of things in the groups. There's a whole section you
Yeah.
have in the book, and I recommend people get it and read this. You mentioned many of the names of the individuals. So you do some of them. You have really short profiles, like one paragraph on a person. Some
Yeah.
of them it's like a whole page. So people need to get this and read the finer details in it, because even from that, like for myself, I was saying to you, it took me like 2 months to go through this book because I stopped and kept
Yeah.
searching everybody up. So there's a lot of content there. Um,
And one of the reasons why, some are shorter than others is that I had to rely on open source, obviously.
yeah,
I could go on for paragraphs and pages on certain people, but I can't disclose sources, and so I had to rely solely on open source. And in some cases, there wasn't a lot of open source information available, so I had to kind of limit myself in terms of what I could write.
yeah, 100%. Um, just two things that I kind of want to finish on was the political correctness issue, and we've kind of been touching on some of this, but you talk a lot about the wording that is used
Mm.
and how these things get framed, and that's from switching from like Islamic terrorism, right wing terrorism, to now it's something motivated violent extremism, so ideological motivated violent extremism, or political or religious. You're saying it's too generalized. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. So this came out after the Trudeau government was elected in 2015. It came out in 2017, and in some ways, I understand it, because if you look at Section 83.01 of the Criminal Code, and they talk about terrorist activity, terrorism activity is defined as a serious act of violence committed for political, ideological, or religious reasons. So the words are there, the terminology is there. There were a lot of protests in the late 2010s, especially by Muslim groups, saying, and as I said earlier, this has nothing to do with Islam. You're painting all Muslims with the same brush. You're making us look bad. We don't like the term Islamist terrorism, despite the fact it's the worldwide recognized term by scholars, by academics, by governments, by counterterrorism officials. It is the term. It's one that's been used for decades. Yet we here in Canada, never wanting to make anyone feel bad, decided to ban that term. And so as a consequence, they said, well, we're just going to call it religiously motivated violent extremism. We even got rid of the word terrorism. I don't know why we did that, but we did. The problem is that the term is so generic as to be meaningless, and it's meaningless on a couple of levels. First of all, look at a group like ISIS. It's been around since 2013, 2014. And you have to categorize them. Are they political? Are they ideological? Or are they religious? When in fact, they're all three. I mean, ISIS created a caliphate. That's a political entity. So they're politically motivated. ISIS is called Islamic State. That's religious. And of course, there's an ideology that they Al Qaeda. I mean, ISIS came out of the old Al Qaeda in Iraq. So there's a flow here.
Yeah.
There's a direct line, I think, of precedence. So using terms like religiously motivated are inadequate because they simply don't cover what needs to be covered. Secondly, when you use a term like religiously motivated, it suggests that in theory, any religion can be used to justify terrorism. And in theory, the answer is yes, they could. And my fifth book was entitled "When Religion Kills." I look at Buddhist. There's actually Buddhist terrorism, believe it or not. It's not an oxymoron. There's Hindu terrorism, there's Sikh terrorism we've talked about, there's Christian terrorism, there's Jewish terrorism, and there's Islamic terrorism. So all religions in theory can be used to justify acts of violence, and that's been shown through history. Um, the problem is that in 2023 rather, the dominant form of religious terrorism is Islamist around the world. And if you don't believe me, read the Global Terrorism Index. It's an annual publication put out for the Institute for Economics and Peace in Australia, and they document every terrorist attack on the planet. And in the last couple of years, there's been between 12 and 20,000 deaths from terrorism worldwide, and 98% of them are caused by Islamist terrorists. So
Wow.
Islamist terrorism, we call it, is the dominant form everywhere around the world. Is the far right rising? Yes, to a certain extent, but Islamist terrorism is still number one. And the term is meaningless because not all religions are equally responsible for terrorism. And the joke I like to tell, and people, get a kick out of this, is, what goes clip, clop, boom,
Hmm. What is it?
a Mennonite suicide bomber. How many Mennonite suicide bombers have you ever heard of?
None that I know of. Yeah.
How many Islamist suicide bombers? There was just one yesterday in Pakistan. 52 people were killed by a terrorist in Baluchistan, which is in southwestern Pakistan, a jihadi. So, this term religious is inadequate because it doesn't cover groups like ISIS. And secondly, it doesn't account for the fact that as of 2023, one particular religion is dominant. And yes, there's such things as Hindu extremism. We're seeing that big time in India right now. We're still talking about Sikh extremism 40 years after India, but it ignores the fact that at this juncture in human history, Muslims who abide by a certain interpretation of Islam are the dominant actors. But not saying so is simply political correctness run amok.
Well, I feel like the political correctness part, it treats people as stupid.
It does.
It's honestly, it's like you don't think they're going to figure it out. They're just going to completely just be fooled by the smoke and mirrors. I mean, some people are to an extent, but so we'll call it the religiously motivated hyphen Islamic terrorism. like why add this extra step for us? We just call it what it is and deal with it, right?
It's so Canadian. I'm sorry to say that. I'm a proud Canadian. If you cut me, I bleed maple leaf red. I mean, I love this country, but good God, we're stupid sometimes. And the terminology we use is just it's laughable. And people are laughing at us, by the way, outside of Canada.
Yeah.
Like why can't the Canadians call this what it is? Because they're so woke or whatever kind of thing. It's embarrassing. And I've talked to my colleagues internationally, and they say, like, why can't you guys just figure this thing out? Well, because we're Canadian.
We spend so much time and effort and money coming up with all these crazy ideas, but not actually
Yeah. And
solving anything
apologizing.
and apologizing. But we're not actually solving it, right? We're not
No,
fighting the crime. We're not
no.
doing these things that we should. And I've heard that from informants too. They've told me, like, yeah, you used to spend your money doing all these things and chasing us. Now you spend it on social justice issues that,
Yeah, I know.
they don't see it. And a lot of them are from the same minority groups that we're apparently saving. So it's like, how's that play out in your mind when they're the ones doing a lot of the harm to the very communities that are
I
saying
know.
that we're harming them, but trying to protect them from? Yeah.
Well, and again, pointing out the Coastal GasLink attack in 2022. I mean, nobody in the government is using the T word. No one in government has called this an act of terrorism. Why? Because it's inconvenient to do so.
Hmm.
Because it wasn't the Proud Boys or the Soldiers of Odin or the Hammerskins or the neo-Nazi wankers. It was probably a left-wing group and or a First Nations group. And can you imagine, Nathan, a Canadian politician saying First Nations are responsible for an act of terrorism in Canada?
Yeah, and you mentioned
By
that.
the way, we're recording this on Reconciliation Day, right? You think the Canadian government have the balls to say that?
Yeah, well, man,
Yeah.
everything nowadays is so political. So
Yep.
one of the things I just want to kind of wrap up with is talking about the families of some of these people.
Mm,
And you've had the chance to speak to some of the families of these offenders, and
yeah.
I'm wondering what's that like?
I don't know if in your career you've had to talk to victims' families.
Yeah,
I'm sure you've had to go to families and say your son or daughter's been killed, whatever kind of thing.
yeah,
This was different. This is where I had the opportunity to meet with, in this case, mothers, and I've met with three of them, whose sons were jihadis and are dead. They died in terrorist attacks abroad, and you're there to you know you, how to put this. You're not there to make them feel good. You're not there to help them deal with their pain. You're there to gain intelligence, and that may seem really crass and really insensitive, but that's your job. You're trying to get them to explain to you what they think happened to their son.
yeah,
And as somebody who specialized in what are called signs of radicalization, early signs that we can detect this, hopefully before it becomes too late, you're getting them to rack their brains for when did I first start noticing the signs my son was going through this? And I got to tell you, it's one of the most painful things I have had to do ever in my life is sit and ask a mother to relive her son's life. And she knows full well, A, her son is dead, and her son has a reputation going forward of being a Canadian terrorist.
yeah,
It's I don't know how you feel when you have to go talk to families about this, but this was really, really I learned a lot, but it was like this is one of the toughest things I had to do because it's almost like I was reopening the wounds
mm,
in a way. And I remember in the one case, the woman had I walked into the house and the woman had I would call it a shrine. She had all of her sons like photographs going back to elementary school, and there were candles lit, and that was her commemoration of her son. And her son died in killing people abroad in a terrorist attack.
yeah.
It's almost surreal. But yeah, that I'm glad. I mean, look, I was asked to do it as part of my profession, was part of my job, but it was it was um it was really really tough.
I think the biggest thing is they've only ever known their kid in a certain context, right? They obviously didn't
Yeah,
see this other lifestyle
yeah,
or other way, so it's like it can't be in their mind. But
yeah.
the yeah,
And I think, sorry to interrupt. Also happened was that I found they saw it happening, but didn't realize what it meant.
yeah, that could be
So
definite element.
they saw the changes.
Mm,
They saw the changes, but they didn't appreciate what the meaning of the changes were. And it's almost like you kind of feel, well, if you had known this back then, would you have acted differently and or done something that you would have normally done to get your kids some help, whatever kind of thing? Too late now, of course, the kid's dead. But it's this I've always said that radicalization never happens in a vacuum. There are always signs and people dismiss them. Oh, it's not important. They're going through a phase. Oh, it's a group they're hanging around with. Oh, they're just, they'll get over this at some point. And chances are they don't.
yeah,
In the worst case scenario, they die and kill people in the process. And so one of the reasons why I wrote my first book back in 2015 was, these are signs and don't ignore them. I'm not saying that they're inevitably going to lead to the point where your son and or daughter or husband or whatever brother becomes a terrorist. But all I'm saying is that these are worrisome indicators. And at a minimum, you should keep note of what's going on. And if it gets worse, to want to call somebody. But I'm sure it's again, it's probably the exact same thing in your profession. I'm guessing.
Yeah, like we see, you see that with or crime figures, right? If somebody gets murdered, you want to go talk to the family, and basically, so you're going to go there. Sometimes you're going to go there and tell them your family member's dead, and in the same uh, scenario, though, or at the same time, again, you're there for a specific job because if they live there, their room could hold a lot of information, a lot of clues, could be evidence. It like there's a
Yeah,
ton of stuff in there. But while you're
yeah,
like, this person's died, uh, can I see their room because that might help us either prevent more
yeah,
deaths or solve their death.
yeah,
So you're trying to, yeah, they're trying to get something while informing them of the most horrific thing in their life, burying a child. Uh, so it
yeah.
is, yeah, it's a different dynamic when you go into these
Mm,
situations, and it's not easy.
no.
But I don't know if it's for myself.
Part
It's
part of the job.
yeah, it's more you're just detached and you see. I think it's looking more to the future and seeing like I need to get in there and do this because it is going to save other lives, or we're going to
Yeah,
catch the bad guy who did this,
yeah,
whatever it might be. So
yeah. Yeah, it's a good
yeah,
point. Yeah.
do you have a lot of families follow up and like come forward after the fact and say, "Hey, we actually noticed these things, or we found more stuff"? Does that ever happen?
Yeah, and I think on occasion we would get calls from people at the service saying, "I've noticed that my son, daughter, husband, whatever kind of thing is exhibiting certain character." I remember a case actually in Toronto where we got that, and we were able to act in time, and I think nothing ever happened to the kid. He ended up kind of realizing this was probably a stupid set of decisions and moved off, kind of thing. So yeah, I do recall one case where it ended positively, kind of thing. But on the other hand, if you don't know what to look for, and this is especially true for converts. So imagine an average family in Edmonton, right? Let's assume, for argument's sake, that they're a Christian family, and one of the kids decides to convert to Islam for whatever reason. How the hell are the parents going to know what's normal and what's not normal?
Yeah,
You don't have any knowledge of the faith. You don't know what's seen as okay and what's not seen as not okay. So if you don't know that, at what point do you express concerns? You think that they're just going down a pathway, and as your child, you want to support them in their quest to find meaning or whatever. You're not going to know when something is that's not normal. I need to look more into this because this might end up badly.
I think that comes down to going back to some of our earlier conversation where it's on these organizations, police, intel, immigration, whoever it might be, to get into those communities and educate them.
Exactly.
I know some people that I've talked to have said like, well, we can't disclose certain things because then drive them further underground or can't find them. It's like my response to that would be, well, what if we drive them in a direction we want them to go, and then they're easier to
Yeah,
find? So I think
exactly.
there's always a way to look at it. Um,
It's a fine line, but I think you can be mad.
yeah. So I think it's important being in those communities and just educating them, like, hey, and then you're there ahead of time because this came up in your book as well. But um, you don't want to come in only when bad things are happening because they criticize you
Mhm,
at that point. But it's like, okay, we've been here, we've been educating you on all these issues. Here's what's going on in your community, just as I'm going to go to the next community and tell them what's going on.
mhm,
And then we're
mhm.
expecting you to call us and to uh, we help you, you help us, and we can
Yep,
stop all the killing. So yeah,
exactly.
but that kind of bringing us up to the end of our time here. I kept you for 2 hours today.
I
So,
know.
is there anything that we didn't cover that you really want to make sure we get to? I think we went through all the notes.
Yeah, I think what I would end on, a couple of things, Nathan. I
Mm,
mean, there is a chapter on the far left and the far right, and in all honesty, it's something that a lot of people are being very, what's the word I want to use here? Panicking right now about the far right. And there's no question the far right has risen in recent years. So when I was with the service, I left operations in 2013, retired in 2015. Our far right investigations were minimal, only because there was nothing to look at. We looked at it in the 90s, and I talk about it in the book. A very good friend of mine used to be an investigator in the 90s. These guys couldn't organize a piss up in a bar on a good day.
Yeah.
They were useless wankers. And so there's no threat. And people say, well, how do you know? I said, well, we didn't look at them and nothing happened. So that tells me that there was no threat. Because if you're not looking at it, same with you guys, right?
Yeah.
If you're not looking at a certain sector of the population, you don't have sources or investigations, and they're a serious threat, whether it's organized crime or gangs, whatever, they would do things because they're not being looked at. Well, nothing happened. So clearly they weren't a threat. I think that's changed. But I also think that people are panicking about the far right in the same way they panicked about jihadis after 9/11.
Yeah.
In that they saw, every Muslim was a potential terrorist, and we're going to see more of this stuff, and we didn't. And I think people are oh, look at all the hatred online. Well, I can tell you, out of 1,000 people that post stupid shit online, 999 are too stupid or cowardly to do anything about it.
Yeah.
You can't equate online activity with what IRL in real life, right? That's the first mistake people make. Secondly, is that the far right, and again, the statistics bear this out, are far less lethal than jihadis.
Hmm.
That's simply a fact. You can't get around that. I'm not saying we ignore them or we're not ignoring them. So that was it. The other thing is that people are dismissing the far left, and with climate change and global warming, my I'm not saying it's a prediction, but my fear is that you're going to see people say maybe we got to start blowing shit up to get attention
Yeah.
because no one's paying attention to us. I think the Coastal GasLink attack was exactly that. So we've moved to the point where for the last 20 years, it's all jihadis all the time, to where now we can't even use the term jihadi for reasons we already discussed. It's racist or whatever. It's all far right all the time. And I think that's wrong. I think that's a very dangerous thing to talk about. And secondly, we got to look at other forms of extremism down the line. And lastly, I guess one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book is to show exactly what security services have been doing for the past 40 years.
Hmm.
So we don't tell our story well. We're very reticent in the public, leakers notwithstanding. And I think Canadians should realize you've got a bunch of women and men, whether it's law enforcement or security intelligence, and they go to work every day with one thing in mind only, and that's to help keep Canadians safe.
Yeah.
And we have our methods, and we have our legislation, and we have our tools, and we have our resources, we have our budgets, and all we're trying to do is stop bad shit from happening. And do we get it right all the time? Of course, we don't get it right all the time, but we get it right more often than we don't. And I guess I would just want Canadians to recognize that we have these people, and that's what they do for us. And Canadians should be grateful and stop freaking apologizing for everything all the time and saying, yeah, we need law enforcement. Enough of this defund the police force shit. We need law enforcement to prevent bad things from happening. We need security intelligence from stopping bad things from happening. And I'm very proud of the organization I work for. I'm very proud of the people I worked with. And I think Canadians should tip their hat to what these people are doing for them on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Even more so with globalization and just how interconnected this world is. You need that much more resources and people on top of things. That's one of the reasons for doing this show and having as many,
Yeah.
CSIS, RCMP, anybody, all the way down municipal services, have all the people on that I got time to get on here and
Mhm.
uh, you know telling their stories and kind of getting some knowledge out there. So
Well, and thanks to you for doing this. I mean, it's really important. I mean, as well as I do that there's all kinds of other podcasts out there that are the exact opposite of this, that, what you do and what I used to do is evil and it's wrong and we got to stop it. And so we don't tell, I said that we don't tell our own story well. So congratulations to you and thank you on behalf of, law enforcement, security intelligence, that you're out there giving an alternative view to Canadians. And I think it's important. I mean, you should only ever make your mind up about things once you've heard both sides of the story. And I think what you're doing is telling the other side of the story. So thanks.
thank you. So that kind of wraps this episode. So everybody can go get the book, get some education. This is necessary history here. The Peaceable Kingdom, a history of terrorism in Canada from Confederation to present, by Phil Gurski. So, yeah, thank you for coming on.
I'm sure it'll be a part three at some point because something's going to happen, Nathan. But no, thanks for the opportunity to talk. And yeah, if anybody want to get a copy of the book, it's available on Amazon, published by Double Dagger Press. And so, love for you to get a copy, read it, and let me know what you think about it.
Great. and I'll throw up all the links when I post this. So
Thanks.